Hi, I'm Terrell Turner, the host of the Finance and Accounting Show. And today we have a great guest on. Now, one of the things that people don't often think about when you're talking to your finance or your accounting professional that helps support your business is conversations about work-life harmony. Because I think it is a great thing to focus on profitability. It's a great thing to focus on, growing your revenue, managing your costs. But something that people really have to think about that is becoming a more and more front stage topic is how do you manage that work and that life harmony? Because if you don't manage that, then in the long run, you really won't have much profit and much revenue to really manage. So I have a great guest on, Amy Vetters, and I am excited to bring her on. So stay tuned for today's episode. So without further ado, let me bring on my guest. Amy, welcome to the show. How are you doing?
Hi, Terrell. Happy to be here.
Absolutely, absolutely. Now, I've been looking forward to this conversation because I think that, work and life harmony is something that not a lot of people really hear when it comes down to talking to their finance or their accounting professional. But I think that it is a very, very underrated topic that really should be talked about. And before we jump into the details of that, can you tell us a little bit about your background?
Sure. I'm a CPA, so I have a traditional background in accounting, started out in audits, but opened what is now called client advisory services. At the time, there wasn't such a thing. I just didn't do audit and served my clients with bookkeeping and fractional CFO and controllership work. And then eventually moved into the tech space because I got so involved with implementing technology and software for clients that I loved, and started running the accountant channels for some of the biggest software companies like Intuit and Xero. So really have done a lot of pivots in my life. And really it all began with growing up in an entrepreneurial family. My grandfather was a CPA. My mom owned maid services when I grew up that I worked in. And so just always had this drive to help small business owners and help people achieve their dreams.
Awesome. I love it. I love it. Now, one of the things that I'm very curious about is growing up in such an entrepreneurial environment. A lot of people hear the stories of, hey, this person's an entrepreneur, they work like nonstop and they're just constantly going and going and they really have no time. Like, for you growing up in the environment of seeing, like, say, your parents, explore that entrepreneurial spirit and live it out. What was that like for you?
And at the time, you have to remember too, so I'm 48, really hitting up there. There wasn't computers, for small business owners. So there was a lot more work in the office and away from home. We have a lot more flexibility now with the technology that we have when we implement it in the right ways. And the other thing about it that I think was much harder for an entrepreneur was everything was in your head. And that's why when, software like QuickBooks came out, it was such a game changer for small business owners to be able to see their numbers real time, not just guess what it was on a paper napkin. Now, it's always as good as how they, they put the numbers in, of how accurate it is. But that's where the, intersection of accountants and small business owners really come into play in advisory services to really help them achieve their dreams, but also set the right boundaries. Being an entrepreneur, I just have a quote that I usually use when I talk to small business owners from Lori Grenier from the Shark Tank, where she talks about, entrepreneurs, work 80 hours in order to avoid 40. which I think is such a true story. As we want this freedom as entrepreneurs, but you end up working more because everyone's your boss, your clients, your staff. So if you don't start putting boundaries around your work and really your productivity, you burn out very fast.
Awesome, awesome. Now, one of the things that are very interesting is like last week I was in Las Vegas at the AICPA Engage conference, and one
I
of
was
the
there with
interesting
you.
one of the interesting things that came up in like the I think it was the industry update, where the CEO of I think it was CPA.com, where he's talking about the future or the trajectory of CAS advisory services and how that is becoming much, much more of a bigger thing. From your perspective, I mean, like, so you started in the
20
kind
years
of
ago.
yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, how have what have been your thoughts on seeing that change? Because even when I started in public accounting, it was all audit compliance, but
Yeah.
now we're seeing a shift more to CAS. What's been your perspective on that?
Yeah, so I think that's an interesting question because I often will think that too, that I don't feel like this is new. I think for many people, they've been doing it for a long period of time. What is new is bigger firms and more traditional firms getting into client advisory services that have never gotten into that before. So, like you, when I went to school, it was audit or tax. You really didn't know there were other pathways in the accounting profession, and I still think that can hold true a lot of times. I speak to a lot of university students in the accounting and trying to motivate them to stay in the profession, because when you're younger you're doing the stuff that's not fun. You really have to have that longer term vision of what you want to create in the world and know that these are your steps to get there, and to be really open to the opportunities that present itself in the profession. And there's so many. And client advisory services is really starting to take hold. The problem that I see with most of the practices that I consult with is they try to do it the same way they've done tax or audit, and it's not the same practice. And they end up working around the clock without as much profitability because they really haven't set the foundation for their business. So this makes you think like an entrepreneur, even if you're within a CPA firm, and you really have to have an entrepreneur mind when putting a practice like this together. And part of that is really stepping back from your business and building a foundation. You can't build a house without the foundation, and there's no way for this practice to scale and to do well unless you have a plan and the right things in place. And part of putting the right things in place, the whole reason, is so that you have the boundaries, you have work-life harmony, so that you're not being overworked and you can't keep staff motivated and wanting to stay in what you do.
I think that's a very interesting point you brought up about just how I think a lot of times people do try to take that tax or that audit framework and
Mhm.
just apply it to CAS. Now,
Yeah.
for those that may not be as familiar with, CAS and what that means, or even understand the difference between CAS and compliance, can you share what's your perspective on how do you kind of think about the difference between them?
Really great question. So when I started my business, and it was over 20 years ago doing this, uh, one of the things that it brought back for me was my whole purpose of becoming an accountant. And so growing up in a small business, and the reason that I chose accounting was I went to all these networking events with my mom, and I would ask the people at those networking events, what degree should I get? Even though I kind of had accounting in my head, but I wanted to get their perspective having been in business. And all of them said accounting, because it is the way business works. If you understand accounting, you can do so much more in your business and understand what's happening. So what I talk a lot about in the whole broader business balance, bliss, work-life harmony, is about personal purpose. And a lot of times we set business goals, we set projections, we try to hit benchmarks. That's why we'll create a client advisory services practice with the same benchmarks that a tax or audit practice has, instead of stepping back and really understanding what our personal purpose is. What is the value we want to create, and who are we creating it for, and why? And my personal purpose was always to help small business owners to be able to stay in business, achieve their dreams, and their staff and employees are able to do what they love to do as well. Their customers are able to enjoy those businesses because they stay in business. So understanding that personal purpose differentiates how I deliver my services as an accountant, because I'm very targeted to what I want to do. And it's not just the compliance side of putting a profit and loss statement together, a balance sheet, or maybe even a cash flow that they'll never understand. It's rolling up your sleeves and understanding the business, getting into the operations, understanding what's driving the numbers, so that you can actually give them advice and be a strategic partner in their business. And that's what always excited me about this work, was it brought me back to my entrepreneurial roots, because I was working with small businesses, but I could see the impact I was making on their business. And a lot of times the same skill sets you use as an auditor, you're using in client advisory services, because you're helping them with business processes and internal controls. They just don't realize it. And they actually want your advice. They're not looking, they're not concerned about what you might find. They're hoping you find something to help them. So a lot of the traditional compliance skill sets that we start with end up helping us in this next, service, if that is something that we desire in our career.
Awesome. I love it. I love it. I find that, every time I talk to people who really do kind of focus on CAS, is something that comes up, is like I said, with that closer partnership with the client, as opposed to, like, when I was in public accounting, one of the things that I would say is I was the auditor. I was the auditor, and they didn't see me come around. It's just kind of like, oh my gosh, the auditors are here again.
Oh, the worst is when you're sitting across the desk, they get a phone call and they're like, I'm with the auditor. Okay.
It's one of those things you look at them, it's like, well, I can tell where I rank on their Christmas list.
Yeah.
Awesome. So now for yourself, Alexis, I think you brought up another interesting point about how some people had this mindset, this CAS approach, and this CAS mindset of really helping business owners or helping business leaders really navigate the finance, as opposed to just, being the compliance person who slaps their hand every time they get out of line, but really helping them navigate that. Now, for you, throughout kind of your career, you seem to have had that purpose, for quite some time now. How has it been for you or do you feel like the clients that you have worked with, that's what they expected from you? Or do you feel like some of the clients expected you to be more compliance focused and you had to help them get comfortable with trusting you as an advisor?
Well, I think it's really important to really step back and understand your purpose. This is what I work with accountants a lot first when putting this practice together, because the messaging that goes out into the world on your website, on your social media, all of that sets the expectation of who's going to call you. So it is important that you understand who you're trying to target and the work that you want to have, and not just take any work. I think that's a hard thing that I see a lot of accountants go through, is this tug of war of I know the compliance is steady work, and if I let that go, how will I know I'm going to replace it on the client advisory side? And then there's just this leap of faith that we have to take in that, if we really believe in doing this and want to do it. So I know that when I put myself out there, I made sure that my messaging was around how I help so that it eliminates the clients I don't want. And so that's really important, is that we're not just taking any client that walks in the door. If they're not going to be a client that wants to collaborate, that wants to talk monthly, weekly, whatever, time period you set up with that client, that doesn't value advice, that wasn't necessarily a client I wanted. Now, I work with firms that they don't want to talk to the client. Like, their client advisory services practice is all after the fact bookkeeping. They're the back office. They're taking care of everything. They're happy there. So it is important to understand, where are your boundaries again? Like, what are the types of clients you love to work with and why? And so if you're not looking for that, monthly advisory discussion or CFO work, that's okay. But it's all still under this client advisory umbrella. It's just finding your lane and then making sure that your messaging is really, really clear. And when you're got a prospect coming to the door, that you are interviewing them not just interviewing you, so that you make sure that that's the right fit for your business, for the type of clients that you want.
Awesome. I love it. I love it. Now, if people are interested in working with you because they hear the things that you're saying and they're like, hey, I really want to have a better, approach to having a CAS, practice. I really want to improve my firm. And if people are interested in working with you, where can they find you online?
So I have two websites. One of them is amyvetter.com. So if you can't remember the other one, you will find the CAS workshops right on the Amy Vetter site. You'll see Client Advisory Services or the B3 Method Institute. It will take you there. The other website is businessbalanceandbliss.com. And on there is a longer description of the Client Advisory Services workshops we do, and the training that we do, and the webinars that we provide, all to help educate you on putting this type of business together and really creating the business that you desire, and not let it run you, that you start taking control of your business and creating what you want.
Awesome. Awesome. So a couple of questions I wanted to ask you about. One is your podcast. Can you tell us a little bit about that, and what can people expect when they go to listen to it?
Sure. So my podcast is called Breaking Beliefs, and it really moves right into what our discussions have been, is that a lot of time with change, and what I'm talking about here is change, that you might already have a CAS practice, or you might be in compliance looking to do another service line. Change is hard. And in order to go through change, we not only have to nurture the people around us that might work for us to go through change, but we also have to better understand ourselves. And so, my journey of what I talk about in my book, Business Balance Bliss, Business Balance and Bliss, is all about making these pivots in your life and becoming more self-aware, so that you understand the things that create the patterns or the habits that you have that might get in your way. So my podcast is all about interviewing leaders in the profession, in the wellness fields, and so forth, that they talk about their life story, their family of origin, kind of what created their belief systems over time. And then as they grew into leaders, or as parents, or whatever that espouse is, those having to step back and really evaluate, are those my beliefs or are they somebody else's? And really making a conscious decision on how we move forward and how we learn from our past, but making sure it doesn't get in our way of what we want to do in our future.
Wow, awesome. I love it. I love it. I love what you talked about. I mean, on the beliefs, because it's something that I've personally come to understand of, like I said, when you really do embrace something and you identify it as, this is my belief and not necessarily something that was handed down to me, is like,
Mhm.
it unlocks a level of passion, a level of energy like you just wouldn't believe. So I love that.
Yes. And we don't realize how much there's things going on in our head that just are not ours. Someone else put them there, and it's our work to understand that and remove those blocks, and then also understand that for the people around us, so that we're nurturing people through change, understanding what's getting in their way as well on a one-to-one basis, so that we can help everyone move down their journey.
Awesome, awesome. And I know this is, this may be more of some of the stuff that you cover in your podcast. What I'm curious for you is, how did you get comfortable with really assessing the beliefs that you were holding on to, and really get comfortable with, actually questioning, hey, are these my beliefs, or were these just handed down to me? Like, because that can be an uncomfortable process for some people. How did you get comfortable with that?
It was very uncomfortable. And it was one of those things. I think we all have moments in our life where things just kind of come to this awakening point of like, something's got to change. And I write about it in my book, Business Balance and Bliss, of just becoming a CPA firm partner when I was 32 years old. And that was really a moment for me that changed everything, where I wasn't as happy as I thought I was going to be when I got that promotion. And it made me step back to really observe, was this the accomplishment for me, or was this for somebody else? And really trying to understand what would make me happy. And, through that process, it wasn't that I, it wasn't that I wanted to run away, which I think a lot of us, when we get in those moments, we want to like quit everything, run away, just feel good, start something else. That isn't, running away from ourselves isn't going to necessarily be the answer. Sometimes we have to go through it to get through it, and we can't go around it. It'll just keep coming up in our face. And so, one of the things that I realized through that process was that I really had a ton of expertise in this field. I really had purpose in what I was doing, but there were pivots I needed to make in my career so that I felt happier and created more bliss, is what I talk about, this maintenance of happiness. And instead of looking for it from the outside, what can I do internally each day to make sure that I'm maintaining that happiness? But it's a hard process. I went through therapy. That's when I started yoga during that time period. And it really was a lot of self-reflection and a lot of observation of the messages that went through my head, and whether they were mine, somebody else's, how did they get there, doing that deep work. And it's really, it's never over. Like, I think a lot of people think, okay, like I feel better, so it's over. It's never over. What our journey is to really create awareness of when we feel off, and know the tools that we have inside of us to offset that energy, or what we need to do to bring ourselves into balance or equilibrium. And so that's really been the journey for me, because, as soon as you think you got it, something else happens in your life. And so it's important that we practice these tools in our daily life, so that we know how to help ourselves feel better without having to blame the outside world. Like, look at inward first, and then decide what is happening outside of us that's making us unhappy as well.
Absolutely. I love it. I love it. Well, what can you tell us again the name of the podcast that people need to search for to find more great content like that?
Sure. So if you go to amyvetter.com, you'll find it there. It's Breaking Beliefs. You'll also see my book, Business Balance and Bliss. And there's actually two books, because we talked about client advisory services. The second book, it's called Integrative Advisory Services, Moving Your Accounting Practice Beyond the Cloud. So both of those books are on my website if interested, or you can join me for a workshop or a webinar coming up.
Awesome. Awesome. Now, you also mentioned about being at the AICPA Engage 2022 conference. What were your key takeaways or your key experiences from the conference?
Well, number one, I think people are so happy to be back together. I spent a lot more time, meeting with people and seeing, just having that face-to-face interaction that, a meeting like that brings so many different industries together in one place that are all serving the same profession. But, um, it's really important to be able to bring all that together. And the other thing that I loved, and I'm hoping to see more of, and is that they had the top 40 under 40 Black CPA awards. And really there was a heightened awareness of diversity, which is so lacking in our profession. And it's important that work keeps being elevated, because, if we're going to change the profession, then other people need to see themselves in the profession. And so if they see the same type of person, it's harder for people to think that there's a place for them. And so that was definitely a nice thing to see there. And just the focus on the track on diversity was so important. And that also, diversity and inclusion also leads into the whole talent management issues that are happening in accounting firms, which to me are hand in hand, right? Inclusion means anybody, whoever you are, whatever background you have, is making sure that you feel that you are a part of this profession, that you are accepted in the workplace, and that you have a career, that can be a destination for you in the profession and not have to leave it. And so the work that needs to be done around that, I think, is just beginning, because the good part about COVID and the bad part, was this mass exodus from accounting because of just how horrible the hours were. But it was a wake-up call, because it's never been better than this. And so it's finally, firms are going to have to change and really put the investment in to change the culture. And it's pushing that change forward, which I'm happy to see.
Awesome. I love it. I love it.
What about you?
So it was it's very funny that you mentioned about the 40 under 40, because I was one of the 40 under 40, and it was a very eye-opening experience. And I will say I am a huge fan of Carla Harris.
Oh, yeah.
I remember hearing her speak. It back when I worked at General Electric, I heard her speak at a conference, and her book Strategize to Win. Like, I read that book whenever I changed jobs or I took a promotion, because it was just a great way to reset my mindset for, hey, a new stage, new challenge. We go back to things that I know that really helped me get in the right mindset to win at whatever level I was at. So seeing her speak in person was phenomenal for me. I think very amazing speaker. And I think she's very transparent about the things that she's been through. So that was great. And I also just meeting people in person. It's one of those things of hosting a podcast. What was very interesting is I did some filming while I was there live at the event in the AICPA studio. And one day after wrapping up, I was packing my stuff up, and there's a guy that walks by, and he's like, "Hey, Terrell," and I spoke to him because I had actually been a guest on his podcast. And so him and I were catching up. We go downstairs to like the exhibit area, and I end up running into like 15 other people that I met via the podcast that I didn't know was there. And it's like, man, after talking to each other for like 2 years, we finally get to see each other in person. So
it matters. That human connection matters, right?
yeah, so that was huge for me. I really enjoyed that. Well, I will say, Amy, thank you so much for being an amazing guest on today's show. But before we wrap up, one thing I always like to ask people is, what's one piece of advice that you would share with your target audience?
To say yes, to be open to opportunity, and not get in your own way of why something won't work, is to be open, keep saying yes, keep observing what the opportunities are, and, just create the career that you desire.
Awesome. I love it. Well, Amy, you've been an amazing guest, and thank you for coming on today.
Thank you.
Thank you for tuning in to another episode of the Finance and Accounting Show. If you like what you heard, don't be selfish. Make sure you hit that subscribe button and then share this with a friend, because you know a business owner that could definitely use this insight. So be sure to hit that subscribe button, share it with a friend, and turn on the notification bell so you get all the updates when we release a new episode.